Well, welcome to Unscripted,
Yeah. Thanks.
downtown LA.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, how you doing?
Pretty good. Trying to fight a cold, but I'm good.
Awesome. We're really here to talk about Goldie Awards 2018, round two. So tell me about what Goldie means for you.
Oh man, the Goldie Awards means a ton for me because it encompasses so many parts of my life, right? So for anyone who doesn't know, it's a DJ battle and a beat battle. It's a new competition that I started last year. Happens in New York, and I think part of the motivation for doing it in the first place was even just realizing that I'm in a position where I I feel like I could change the way that battles are perceived at this point in time, and I have such a debt of gratitude for what the battle scene did for me. My career was started when I won those battles when I was a teenager, the DMC and other ones too. And so I know how much that did for me as far as just being a launch pad and and obviously like what I stand for as a DJ and a turntablist is really championing, the technical and skillful sides of this art form. And for whatever combination of reasons, it feels like in recent years and even for a while, that branch of DJing hasn't gotten as much attention. It's like DJing itself in general, especially people knowing the names of DJs and understanding that DJs are, musicians and artists. That's grown and grown and grown. But the most skillful DJs somehow haven't been getting that spotlight. Um, yeah, so a big point of the Goldies was to remedy that, like to basically look at where culture is at now and say, okay, now DJs are finally accepted as huge artists. It's no longer a surprise to see, you know, DJ Snake breaking Spotify and YouTube records and Diplo doing the same and Skrillex. I remember when he was on the cover of Rolling Stone a couple of years ago. That was a huge milestone. Um, you know, that level of recognition is accepted. But and on the producer side, I think producers are probably more famous than ever. You know what I mean? Like whether it be Metro Boomin, Southside, Murda, TM88, Cardo, all these guys um, are bona fide personalities. People, even young music fans will follow, you know, what even someone on the come up, someone like Kenny Beats, like a young fan will follow whoever's having like is hitting their strides at that point in time and listen to whatever music they put out. So producers are in the front seat, in the driving seat, um, and even outside of that sound, the level to which there's a legitimate cult that's built around the legacy of the Madlibs and the Dillas and this and that too. I think like that's so cemented, and yet still I think that there wasn't really an event or even just a sort of infrastructure that properly celebrates, the producer, um, and specifically like the creative side of the production process. Not just the personality, but like how artful it really is, how creative it really is to come up with amazing beats of different sounds and styles and stuff. So the Goldies was that was the sort of mission statement to go and shine a light on the craft itself and on the ones that are pushing the technique forwards. And even for me personally, it means a ton because it's been a way for me to tie a loop between different parts of my career, my life, because the sort of entrepreneurial and impresario side of the Goldies endeavor is that's me using a lot of the know-how that I've developed by running Fool's Gold and doing Fool's Gold Day Off and things like that, right? So doing Fool's Gold and specifically, let's say the Day Off events, that's taught me how to put together an event in a way where I've learned how to, sort of control the kind of audience that comes in terms of, is in terms of even just getting, the young creative kids that are really influencing kind of the next wave,
Mm.
and all the things that come with the process of, I would even say, marketing this kind of event, right? Like these Fool's Gold events have become the place where people come to discover the next wave of talented artists.
Right.
And everything from the artwork of the posters to every choice and name that goes on a poster or a flyer plays a role in drawing that kind of audience, the audience that's really, you know, I mean, I hate to use those kinds of words, but tastemakers and early adopters and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. Like that is a thing at the end of the day. Um,
It's part of the DJ culture too, right? I mean,
yes. And so, yeah, but part of what I love with doing the Goldies is I feel like I'm taking this scene and this culture that's like, that holds such a special place in my heart, because it's the origin of my career, turntablism, battle DJ, just banging beats on pads and that whole thing. And then my sort of, I'm putting on my Fool's Gold hat that's learned how to market an event and really pay attention to the look and feel of things, and how the choice of every person involved can influence what kind of press attention you get, what kind of crowd you get, and how to really fill a room and get those numbers of, you know what I mean? Because like the Fool's Gold events they do pretty good numbers.
Yeah,
There's a
they
lot of
sure
people
do.
there, and that all stems from, everything's a decision. Everything is intentional, right? So that really understanding the intention and just how far that intention can go. So I use that hat to try to bring in a new breath of life into the turntablist scene. That's that's truly, like, for me, what it represents in my experience, even in my day to day of like setting up this event. And that's the reason why I'm so hands on in it, and it's become like so much of my mission, because I know that I can tie those pieces together. And even musically, um, to make sure that the contestants represent a wider variety of styles and of trends, because I do feel like both the DJ battle scene and the beat battle scene have tended to, you know, you tend to hear the same kinds of styles and
It
sounds.
becomes generic.
It becomes, or at least it becomes kind of repetitive, and it becomes like one type of sort of one type of sound, or a kind of post boom bap sort of thing.
Mm.
And it doesn't have to be just that. Like I remember when I had the idea for, I was kind of thinking through, the even just the beat battle, and thinking like, oh, it'd be cool to have producers of different styles. I remember thinking like, maybe we'll get a techno producer in there. And last year, Muscles was one of the contestants, and he came in with the sequencers and stuff. And this year we have Basek and Nick Hook, again coming in with these really modular and sequencer-based setups. I think that's super exciting to put them next to a boom bap producer, and next to someone that's making like really forward-thinking trap with like advanced sound design and shit, and just see, like, I like the idea of putting that variety, and even make sure that there's enough women in the battle, like on for questions of diversity and representation, to really curate that platter. I like the idea that if you make the selection of contestants as varied as possible, then whoever wins just really has to have that extra little thing, the je ne sais quoi, right? That is undeniable. Like, it's almost, to me, it's kind of more exciting to have a battle where there's someone using controllers and someone using turntables and someone using CDJs, because it kind of zooms out. Like, battles became zoomed in
On
for way
one
too
setup.
long.
Yeah.
On one setup and one way of thinking, and certain styles of patterns that everyone did. Like, my battle peers and I, like when I was with the Allies and everything, we all stopped battling after 2000, 2001. And there's a bunch of amazing DJs that have done amazing things since then, and I have a ton of respect for all of them, anyone that's came and contributed. But I will say that in a general sense, I think since that era, um, since the early 2000s, that the battle scene has kind of like zoomed in a bit too much. So again, not to take anything away from the DJs that came after us. There's a lot of them, motivate me, and da da da. There's a ton of skills there, but in a bigger sense, I think it all kind of zoomed in and became variations of one thing. And maybe in a sense, what I'm trying to say with my mission for Goldies is to zoom it back out, because then it's not only about specifically one technique versus another technique. It's about song selection and style and making sure the sound is on point. Like everything, the whole full picture that will make one DJ or one producer stand out. It's the technical shit is super important, and I'm as geeky as the next guy in this scene of ours, and I dig that, and that was a big part of my foundation too. But over the years, the more I've traveled and I've played different kinds of settings, I've learned that there's more to making a mark than only the technical stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean? That it's that full picture that's important. And when you're on a stage next to other DJs and producers that are approaching the whole thing in such a different vibe than you, then you need that full picture to win.
Totally. And you're going through all of these contestants, all these
Mm-hmm.
applications
Yeah.
personally?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a trip. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like to really pull off the Goldie Awards, according to the vision that my team and I had, I've had to do a lot of it. A lot of the curation myself, picking the judges, contacting the judges, tracking someone down, like, you know what I mean? Hitting up the Boys Noise and Mark Ronson types and being like, yo, we need you at this thing. Like, it's important for the bigger picture that we all care about.
Who are the judges this year, by the way?
Ronson, Craze, Just Blaze, Boys Noise, Venus X, Anna Luno, LP, and TM88.
Oh, wow.
I think I remembered everyone. I think that's it. So that, even that selection is super important to me because it's, I wanted to have different genres. I wanted to have, again, diversity. I wanted to have a mix of veterans, but also artists that are still creating the new sounds. It's important that the Goldies feel like the place where, the craft is being pushed forward. I don't want it to be just because at the actual event, I'm not one of the judges. At the actual event, I'm helping host, and I'm just kind of like making sure everything is running right.
From a DJ's perspective.
From a DJ's perspective and from a the vision and presentation perspective. But the submissions, it's mostly myself that goes through them, and when I have it narrowed down to, let's say 30 to 40 per category, and we have to get down to like 8, then I send Craze, and then we powwow together. Craze has been kind of my right hand for that, and then we trim it down to the final 8.
Because that Allies was the beatdown. Allies. The
Yeah,
battle?
with the Allies, we had our own battle called the Beatdown,
Right.
which I believe we did 2 of.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, I think my friend Blake, he who also works for us, he was telling me that there was a great deal of attention paid to the setups there, and there was a real
Yeah.
approach to it from a DJ's perspective, and he said that was one of the coolest things about it.
Oh yeah, I mean that was a big part of the vision too. I think like, for anyone that came up entering battles, at least in some of the battles, you would get a sense that it was, kind of outsiders running these battles. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you need someone that has one foot out, that's one step removed, to be aware of how to present this thing to an even bigger world at large and whatnot. And, again, not to knock any of the battles, but I think after winning, with the Allies, we really swept everything.
Yeah.
DMCs, ITF, Festax, all these battles, all the different categories. And we felt like we could do a better job at some of the execution. And there was even a sort of like, there was a monetary, like a royalty side to the vision of the beatdown. I don't remember if we were able to even carry it through, but for Infamous in particular, shout out to Infamous, he was always really upset that DMC videos never paid the DJs,
Right.
which is true. Or it's like it's a legitimate thing to be upset about. The DMC videos only profited DMC. So when we started the beatdown, I remember we would say, if we make money, we'll split it with the contestants because you guys are the performers. I don't think we made money though. But it was part of the vision, and it was a beginning of um, this sort of turning of the tides of saying, "Hey, we can actually do this ourselves." Even at that point, and the beatdown was in the early 2000s. It's over 15 years ago, but already then, my friends and I were getting to a point where we felt like we could come in as sort of we're starting to be elder statesmen of the scene even then, and
Wow.
just saying, all right, like, hey, to our fellow battle DJs, we'll do one of these ourselves. You guys come and enter, and we'll make sure it's all tight for you all. It was fun. It was fun. We'd started a magazine back then too, Tableist magazine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Tableist was partnership with 12-ounce Profit.
Wow.
Um, so that was cool. I think we did, I don't know, 2 or 3 issues maybe. I'm not sure, but we tried. I think, in those years, in the early 2000s, essentially like when we all stopped entering the battles and we were all looking at this scene, like in a sense, the turntablist scene had this really huge boom at the end of the 90s, right?
Mm.
Like from say 96 to 2000 loosely. And that's when I got into the scene period too. So I always felt fortunate that I came in at a time where the wave was so huge that all I had to do was like once I became pretty good pretty quick, I was able to also just ride that wave. All I
Yeah.
had to do was like stay good or keep practicing, but the wave was there, and I was so young and I looked so young, and there was maybe something about the way I came in that you know put me in a position where I could be kind of the face of the new wave. But that wave was huge,
Yeah, oh,
you
for
know.
sure. I think
So
there was also something relative about your age, with other people that were engaged in that scene.
yeah,
Seeing somebody, it was like an aspirational thing. Oh, I
yeah,
want to be like this guy. He looks young,
he
and
looks
a lot
like
of people
me.
are young
Yeah,
like that
yeah,
too.
yeah. Because I would watch videos of the battle DJs who were killing shit in the years prior than me, and I learned so much from them, and I idolized them so much. And even when I met them, they were so welcoming to me. But one thing that I can't say is there wasn't really a feeling of like that could be me on that stage.
Yeah.
I would watch Qbert or Raider or Melody or whoever and just be like, these guys are aliens. Let me try to be as close to that as I can. And I have had a lot of people tell me over the years that when they saw the video of me winning that first DMC, they saw that and they were like, if he could do it, I could do it.
Oh, for
So
sure.
I think that was more powerful than I realized for a long time. But I think what I was getting at was even then, as we got into the early 2000s, the scene itself started losing a bit of steam, and my fellow allies and myself, then in those years, we were already starting to think, what could we do to carry this forward and to, you know, help even like have a hand in where things go from here on out. Going from participants to, having agency in it.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know how far we quite got with it then because I think inevitably that wind was kind of fizzling out. So we did a few things, like we were just saying, the magazine, the battle. Um, but as far as my path, eventually I met Kanye, and like that became, working with him and playing on those big stages and scratching on those big stages ended up being the path that I took to carry, our craft and our legacy into new places. Um, and then, as the story goes, I went from that to Fool's Gold to other things, and then I got into production. All these new things happened for me, and I think for all that time, from the moment that I, you know, pretty much taught myself how to produce, and then that came with a whole set of challenges, and the scene itself was morphing and kind of like figuring out how to continue finding my place through those changes. I think like over a decade went by where I had to sort of like um, res- have a little bit less peripheral vision as far as the rest of the scene and maybe where I came from or wherever, and just kind of like carry it. Like it's like I had to pack everything in the backpack figuratively and just be like, all right, I'm gonna just bulldoze forward and like make a path for myself even though it doesn't exist. And I think there was a point when, you know EDM wound down in the last couple of years, and like that whole crazy ride of 10 plus years sort of, you know, the storm slowed down a bit, and I was able to kind of look around me, and that's the setting where I decided to do the Goldies, because I was like, oh shit, 10 plus years went by, you know, Fool's Gold survived the decade, which a lot of, which is not a given. A lot of our peer labels didn't.
That's very true.
And like, I somehow taught myself how to produce and had a few records that did kind of well, and others
Kinda.
not as much, but whatever. But still,
Yeah.
like, that was such a whirlwind, because when you have one record that does well, everyone's like, cool, where's the next one?
Of
And
course.
I don't know how to follow up. That's one of my worst
I don't think anyone
things.
does though, right?
Yeah,
That's
I
a
mean, some people do. Some people are like, oh, cool, that works, and they can make 7 of those.
sure. Yeah.
Right? I've never been able to do that. Like, even if you think a Heads Will Roll, the next production that came out after that was a remix for Tiga that was, at this point, is pretty much forgotten, and that was particularly underground. So I went from like this pop dance, indie dance, like genre hybrid thing to a super specialized, techno remix that no one even remembers. But even just dealing with that whole whirlwind, that consumed me for years, and even the exercise of like self-analyzing as those things were going on and try to see what works and what doesn't, and if something doesn't work, learning from those and trying to apply better in the future, and having to suddenly run a company, having a store, all these things that I wasn't trained for at all, but I figured out along the way. I think that felt like a tornado, a really fun tornado. I loved
Yeah.
it, but it lasted years of just like flying by the seat of my pants and just being like, I'm not even sure what I'm doing, but let me just try to do my best and learn from this and learn from that. And it really does feel like in the last 2-3 years, that tornado kind of like became more manageable, and I've been able to look around me and think like, oh well, I've always said I want to do more mentorship and do things like that, and let me start doing more DJ workshops and lessons, and like, just be as present as I can for the next generation. And yeah, again, that's where Goldies came in. It came from that mindset of like, oof, all right, this I've been riding this horse for X amount of years, and like I'll never feel like I really know what I'm doing, but I at least feel like I can manage myself enough to have, parts of my mind that can think of other things.
It's really funny hearing you say that, because I think from the outside everyone's like, "Oh, A-Trak, he's got it together. He's the one who's got it. Has had it together since he was 15."
Yeah,
Like
people think that, but
yeah, and
yeah, I think it's a challenge for anyone on the inside.
for sure,
Yeah.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think it also, just going back to what you said about Heads Will Roll, when that came out, at least from my perspective, it felt very quickly after that Duck Sauce was like this massive thing too. So
Yeah,
I
kind
don't-
of. It's funny to think back though. Heads Will Roll is a remix that I delivered literally 6 months late, that the label refused because I was so late with it.
No way.
Yeah, you gotta check. I gotta send you the box set, the In the Loop box set of my
Oh, yeah.
remixes, because there's all these stories in it. Heads Will Roll. I obsessively tinkered with it for so long. Because the production of it's not even that complicated, but I've always said that it's harder to make simple tracks.
I totally agree.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
And with Heads Will Roll, I like every fill, every transition, like the whole thing of it. I obsessed with it for so long to try to get this balance that really works. And finally, I handed it in, and the label told my then manager, they're like, "We're already at the next single. Why is he sending us a Heads Will Roll
Wow.
remix?" And then I gave it to a few DJs, and a bunch of DJs started playing it a lot right away. And they came back, the label came back a little later, and they're like, all right, we can release it. Like, there's something going on here. And even that was the first sort of push of it. And a year later, Project X came out, and it was featured really prominently in that movie.
Oh, okay.
And that really blew up the remix. But that was a year after it came out.
That's
Over a
crazy.
year after it came out. And a lot of people remember it as the song from Project X.
Hmm.
And I remember, I know all this shit before, where like it was already out for over a year, and even getting it out was a whole hoopla. So there's that, and yeah, it kind of led into we had already started Duck Sauce. I remember because I have a clear memory of playing Armand Heads Will Roll when I finished it. I have a clear memory of going to his apartment, and being like, hey, I just finished this thing, and he has such a good ear. I couldn't tell that it was going to be bigger than another thing I did.
What did he say?
he was like, this is gonna go or something. Like he
Oh,
heard it.
dope.
It's even just I remember he really liked the simplicity of like that first verse where it's just a kick and a bass line. There's no snare, no groove elements or whatever. It's just a kick bass line and her vocal being so prominent. And he was like, this is fucking huge. I was like, oh no, cool, I guess. So I remember that. But yeah, duck sauce was a whole thing too. And even duck sauce, when I think about how I'm probably not great at following up. I mean, this is something that uh, we willfully did, but we followed Barbra Streisand with Big Bad Wolf, which really confused people.
Yep, different sound for sure.
Yeah, but different everything. Big Bad Wolf is inspired by like Chicago Ghetto House
All right.
meets The Witch Doctor. Like it's a weird song. Big Bad Wolf is a weird song. Barbra Streisand is a song that they play at bar
Stadiums.
mitzvahs and
Yeah.
but like a child will like bar mitzvah. Big Bad Wolf, you have to be a little off your rocker to like it. You know what I mean? And so Barbara got us all these pop fans from around the world, and it really impacted internationally. And I remember when we put out Big Bad Wolf, I would sometimes look at comments and shit like that, YouTube comments, whatever, how people are reacting.
no.
And a lot of people, but it wasn't too bad. It was
That was
just
good.
it was just funny because people were like, "This is a joke, right?" Like people are just like, "This isn't." And a lot of those fans didn't even know who Duck Sauce was. They were just, when you get a song that's as big as Barbra Streisand, you get these sort of, either young or casual listener, mainstream fans who definitely don't know or care what the names are A-Trak and Armand Van Helden
They
mean.
don't
They're just
understand the
like,
significance.
no,
Yeah.
they're just like, that's the group that made that song that I really like. And then we come out with like essentially a Chicago house record with no melody and the same words repeated. Even I mean, Barbra Streisand was a word repeated, but Big Bad Wolf obsessively, annoyingly repeating the same words. A lot of the new fans were like, "What?"
For sure.
Like, what's this?
And anyway, the first was the first single, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities between that and Barbra Streisand.
Yeah,
in
because it's
some
kind of
ways.
disco.
Yeah.
It's disco. People wanted to peg Duck Sauce as a disco house group, and maybe that was the first intention. But once we got after Barbara, we got into this zone of like, let's just find catchy loops in any kind of zone. And the best way to illustrate that is if anybody goes and listens to the Duct Tape, which was like, it's a BBC Essential Mix, but that we also released as a mixtape. And the Duct Tape was our cutting room floor of track ideas.
Oh, cool.
And we would go and sample anything. Like it was like on some Dust Brothers, beat nuts kind of mentality of like, if there's a Italian folklore record that has a cool loop, we'll sample it. If there's a Polish prog rock record that has a cool loop, we'll sample it. And like how to go and find earworm in so many different sources, like really on some weirdo like cold cut kind of mentality. That's what Duck Sauce really turned into. So it was definitely we wanted to take it further than disco house. For us, it was it was Prince Paul kind of shit.
Yeah.
Like and that's what the Duck Sauce album ended up being. That was the vision for Quack, was like to take that like Prince Paul slash almost Wu-Tang with the types of interludes. I mean, one of the interludes is literally a riff on a Wu-Tang interlude. Just bizarro, come into our universe kind of approach.
I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's a mixtape mentality.
Yeah.
But I think for some people, maybe the album was kind of misunderstood because a lot of, at least a lot of the casual fans were like, "Oh, these guys made Barbra Streisand." Like sort of what's those compilation like the now this is what
That's
I
what you call music?
Yeah, like
25?
exactly.
Yeah.
Like we had those fans from Barbra Streisand.
For sure.
And those fans definitely weren't checking for the album. But we didn't care. Like both Armand and I are very stubborn in our vision.
Art for art's sake. Kinda.
Yeah, just on some like, let's just do cool weird shit, Because by then EDM had taken off. Barbra Streisand was pre-EDM, or it's right when the shift happened. Barbra Streisand came out. I would argue that it may have been the first truly viral video of the dance music explosion. Because that video really took off. Um, but EDM hadn't fully happened yet, and it ended up happening in parallel because we were in a bunch of countries. We were sharing the top of the charts with Swedish House Mafia 1,
Oh wow.
right? And that song is pretty much when EDM
EDM happened. Yeah.
happened. And so anything that happened after Barbra Streisand, it was the era of the Aviciis and the Alessos and the rest of the Swedes and also Skrillex and the like, right? So
Mm.
all this stuff that was impacting on such a big level, um, and we just didn't want to. I don't know if I should say we didn't want to participate, but we didn't want to suddenly follow a formula when the thing that worked for us, and the only thing that's ever worked for me my whole musical life, is to not really know what I'm doing and definitely not have a formula, and just let the ideas flow. And once an idea is there, try to make it as good as possible, and hopefully people share my taste, or there's people that like something in my ideas. But I've never been able to be the guy that identifies how to make something that works and that churns that out. That's just I don't have that skill. I admire people who have that skill.
Would you want that skill though?
I don't know, because I'm not. Maybe not. Maybe part of it, but it's I'm happy with what I've done and the way that it happened. And
Because I mean, you DJ quite a diverse genres. I mean, we'll get to that later, but
Yeah.
your sets are you cover a lot of genres and a lot of different styles.
Yeah.
And is that similar to the way you approach production?
Yeah, definitely. That eclecticism informs how I produce. I approach my production like a DJ, for sure. Like, everything is based on references and things, little details and artifacts that I like in certain tracks, and in a lot of cases, even just a style reference of like, ooh, I've never made a track that's like, X. Like, DJ's Gotta Dance More was literally, I've never made that house song that has someone talking on it. That's a thing that exists.
Right.
Here, let me try to make one of those. And then I end up kind of making it my way, because again, I don't know how to follow a formula. So it ends up sounding different enough that it doesn't come across, I hope, as a sort of copycat thing. But it always starts with some sort of intention of like, or an idea of, oh yeah, that's a thing I haven't tried yet. Let me try that. And in actually fleshing it out, I'm able to make it different enough that it feels like my own.
That's in a way like a existential kind of sampling way of doing things,
Yeah.
right? And it's funny to hear you say that. I think that these references come up a lot in music and production. Say No Go and Billie Jean. There's the story about Michael Jackson loving this Hall & Oates song, and then they even had a conversation about it. I've heard, and
Oh, cool.
and it's like, yeah, well, I like that song. I kind of want to take this reference, and
Every song's like that, of
right,
course. Yeah.
and they are different, but there's an idea that started this new thing.
Yeah, and it's always fun for us record nerds to, to learn that story. To be like, oh shit, wow, that person was listening to that record. Now I get it. Okay, but it's obviously it's cool when they take it somewhere else.
Totally. All right, so we were just talking about your production. I want to kind of jump back quite a few years.
Okay.
Obscure Disorder. So hip hop and dance music is, I'd say, in my opinion, what I know of you.
Yes.
And would you agree?
Yeah. The combination of those has become my staple. Yeah.
And Obscure Disorder, was that your first production, or was this the Stones Throw, Ralph Wiggum thing?
Okay, so to put things, sorry, I'm congested. To put things in context, Obscure Disorder was a rap group from Montreal that really my brother was producing more than anything, and then I became the DJ, and then we kept that going for many years. So I was definitely a part of the group from the first show we did together, and eventually did a few productions too. And that was on Audio Research, which was the first label that I was involved with. That was, again, my brother and I, back in Montreal. And Obscure Disorder, as the name kind of hints, was definitely an underground hip hop group, and it was in that the late '90s indie hip hop underground backpacker boom. We were just, my brother and I were hip hop heads who loved the ethos, the DIY ethos of that underground movement of that era, buying anything that went through Fat Beats' doors, and just looking at labels like Raucous and Stone's Throw and Fondle 'Em and BBE and any of those, and just really, wanting to be a part of that conversation,
Mm.
literally, like wanting to be one of those. Um, and as far as my first productions, I mean, it's hard to really pinpoint because I was messing around with scratch production early on too. Um, so I think the first track that I made was a track called Umbilical Chords that came out on a compilation that Peanut Butter Wolf A&R'd for Strength magazine, which was a skate magazine. So I met Peanut Butter Wolf and Cut Chemist when there was a compilation called Deep Concentration
I remember that.
that came out that my friend Joseph Patel put together, and Wolf and Cut were the resident DJs of a tour for that
Mm.
comp. When that tour hit Montreal, myself and Kid Koala, and Koala's like 5 years older than me, but us us being the two sort of turntablists of note in Montreal at that time, we played actually the Montreal and the Toronto show of that tour. And right away, I struck a friendship with Peanut Butter Wolf. Um, and he just wanted to get me involved doing stuff. Um,
He had you featured on one of his album, right? You
yeah.
did a
So
cuts
the
on that.
first thing he had me do was this track that I was talking about, Umbilical Cord for Strength magazine. He had also just signed Lootpack and Madlib, so Madlib did all these interludes on that same
Oh,
compilation
dope.
too. And I really remember Wolf playing me a cassette in his car and being like, "Yo, I found this guy called Madlib," and just playing me a bunch of beats. Um, so there was that track, and then yeah, when he did his album, My Vinyl Weighs a Ton, I was one of many DJs who scratched on a song called Tale of Five Cities, I think it was called. And I also released a 45, a 7-inch on Stone's Throw maybe a year later. That was called Enter Ralph Wiggum. And again, that was Wolf encouraging me to make a song. I'd never made a song really before these things. So he really played a big influence in that part of my career of just making me think outside of what I thought I was able to do, because I was so hyper focused on scratching and
Mm.
literally like combos of flares and whatnot. And he was like, "You should make a song for a compilation." I was like, "Oh shit, the Scratch Pickles made that Clams of Death song, so I guess I could make something similar.
Yeah.
Let me grab a kick snare and cut up a sample and scratch something on top of that." Um, Meanwhile, my brother was making a lot of rap beats. He had a S950, and I would just watch him make beats. So just by watching him, I was able to absorb, I mean, the basics of production on a little bit more of a proper level of like even just like what does it mean to truncate a sample and
Mm.
like, you know, how to what to listen for when you're trying to pick, again, a kick and a snare and a hi-hat to sample, like, what ends up sounding good and what doesn't, and how to get a sample on beat and what goes into the construction of layering beats. So I would just watch him make beats. Both he and I had our setups in our parents' basement. So I had my turntables where I would practice. I would usually practice after school, and then he would make beats kind of later in the evening. If I was done with my homework, I would just come back to the basement and watch him put a beat together. And the first couple of Obscure Disorder songs and singles were all produced by him, and I was just doing scratches. But then later on, there was, I think, one or two tracks that I did the beats for. The Grill was probably the better one of whatever among the things that I did. There was a song called The Grill. Yeah.
So Dave's had a really big influence on your life. Dave,
Oh, completely.
obviously
Yeah.
from
He was also,
Chromeo.
I mean, even going back to the very beginning of me even trying to scratch, he is the person that saw me and said, "That thing that you just did is really good, and my friends and I can't even do that. So I'm not sure how you just did that, but I really think that you should practice this every day after school, because this could really be something." And if I was kind of flaking out or doing something else, he would kind of give me a hard time for it and be like, "Hey, like come home, like practice. This is good. You're gonna be good." And now he does DJ sets. For those who don't know, my brother's in the band Chromeo, so they might know him as the singer and guitar player. In those years, he definitely didn't sing, because I really remember the first time he sang on a song, and P and I were like, "What the hell?" Um, but he grew up playing the guitar and then taught himself how to make beats. And so just through his musical ear, Dave always had really, really useful feedback for me that was kind of one step removed from the nerdy technicality of turntablism, because he had a producer's ear before he even realized he was a producer, and he could hear me work on something and tell me that sounds wrong. But he wasn't a scratch DJ, so it wasn't about like, hey, your second orbit is messy. He would just be like, that's sloppy. And then I might be like, what do you mean? I've just spent 2 weeks learning this pattern and I feel like I really got it. No, it's good. And he'd say, no, it sounds wrong. But he would just say again, from a musician's ear, he'd be like, I don't know, it's messy. I don't like it.
Not
and
funky enough.
Yeah, so it would be up to me to kind of be like, fuck, okay. And try shit again and try to figure it out. And then maybe the next day he'd be like, how about now? And he'd be like, yeah, that's good. I like that. You know? Or he would hear me practice routines and be like, this is really repetitive. Like, take this part out. I'm not sure what it is, but just take it out. It's not good. Or he'd say like, well, what would it be like if you sped this up? And then I would be like, I don't know, put the pitch on +8 and try it, and he'd probably be right, So that kind of feedback from early on, it really helped. I'm sure it helped accelerate how quickly I learned. A lot of people are like, people will hear the numbers that I started scratching at 13 and that I was a world champion at 15. And they'll say, well, it's like, how did you learn so fast? And, big part of that was my own crazy focus. But another big part of it was definitely Dave kind of keeping me musically on the right path, I guess, where, I think if you're just working by yourself, you can sort of go on a tangent that you don't realize isn't good and spend too long on that. But if you have someone else who's like, nah, that thing is not worth your time. Go back to the thing you were doing yesterday. I feel like that cuts out it. It takes the fat out.
Totally, yeah.
It just keeps the good meat there.
And so Dave, he helped you a lot with, like, even when you went to your first battle, was he instrumental in that? And then I've noticed
he was my coach. He would just come home and be like, all right, what do you have ready at this point? The battle's in 3 weeks. What do you have? And I'd be like, well, I have this much. And he'd be like, hey, you need a better intro. And then he would just leave that to me, and I had to figure it out, And then he would watch a few days later and be like, yeah, that's cool. And just, I don't know, give me another piece of feedback. The funniest anecdote of Dave helping prep me for battles before my first battle ever, which was the Montreal 97 DMC, which I didn't know then, but that would lead me to World Championships. So I won that, which led me to the Canadian finals, which led me to the Worlds. But I'm prepping for my first battle. And my brother is thinking like, he's just sort of thinking of things that I might not think of. And he's like, well, what about if your needle skips? And I was like, well, I don't know. It happens sometimes when I practice and I just figure out the groove it's supposed to be on. And I just keep going from there. And he'd be like, are you sure you're like prepared? Because that might happen. It's like, you're going to be on a big stage. It'll be different than when you're at home. And then he sort of like stuck with that idea. And I remember he was like, I'm going to make you practice how to recover if your needle skips.
Wow.
So I would start doing my routine, and then he would bang on the table.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'd be like, fuck. And I would have, because the whole thing is like, if your needle skips, you don't know if it went forward or backward or groove.
Sure.
So you can find it, but you don't want to take too long with trial and error. So we did that for a little while, where I would just do a routine, and he would go like that, and I'd be like, fuck you. And I would have to find it and keep it going. So he played a huge role in all that.
That's really interesting. and then he got into funk and dance music.
Yeah.
And if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed around that time that a lot of that stuff you started doing with the French, like Ed Banger guys and stuff was
kind of.
Similar?
There was Chromeo started definitely a few years before I got into electronic music.
Okay.
Chromeo started around 2002.
It's a big departure from Obscure Disorder.
Yeah, for sure. But the thing to keep in mind is Dave and P were in bands in high school before any of this too. They were friends in high school, and they had some other bands just with their other high school friends. And that was already kind of a funk band. That sounded like Jamiroquai.
Oh, cool.
But it was also like in the sort of acid jazz era.
Of course.
Right? So you listen to like Incognito and the brand new heavies, and like I just bought a Giant Step t-shirt the other day. Anything that was on Giant Step, like that era, that's their first band started like that. Then Dave started making rap beats. P never stopped liking funk. So the only rap that P liked was basically G-funk. Either
Hence the
that or,
vocoder.
huh?
Hence the
Yeah,
vocoder.
yeah.
Yeah.
Either that or like New Jack Swing or something. But he was like, by the time it was 94, 95, and we were listening to like Illmatic and fucking Tribe Called Quest, P was still listening to Kid and Play and like Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince
Oh, cool.
and a little bit of West Coast like G-Funk rap. So Dave makes rap beats and basically like goes into like the sort of boom bap lane, and P's still in his funk world. And a few years later, actually prompted by a conversation with Tiga, who's also from Montreal.
Right.
And Tiga was like, "Dave, your beats are good. You should make something else that's like outside of hip hop." And Tiga already had his label Turbo. Chromeo started on Turbo.
That's
It started
right.
with Tiga telling my brother, I want to put out a project of yours that isn't your rap beats." And Dave was like, "Can I bring my friend?" And then him and P started making like a sort of newer version of funk that was produced on electronic equipment and whatnot. Um, and meanwhile, I was still doing mostly hip hop. And so we were still very involved in each other's music, and right from the very beginning of Chromeo, I was always the first person that would hear any demos and kind of help determine what the keepers were and all that kind of stuff. And he would still kind of keep tabs on my DJing, but we started going in our own lanes a little bit. And by 2000, maybe five or so, 5 or 6, even I don't know, yeah, 2004, 5, 6, I was like, coming to visit him in New York. He had already moved to New York. I would go to like these little downtown parties and hear like all these mashup sets that were really creative, and I was like, oh, cool, different genres. And legitimately, like the advent of Serato, Scratch Live came out in what, '03, right?
Oh, 0304, I
Yeah,
think.
'03,
Yeah.
'04. So, and it's exactly in '04 that I started getting interested in playing more than just boom bap and doing more mashups and finding a few electronic records that actually were interesting to me. And, that led to me really making my own sonic identity. It came from a lot of exploring through DJing. Like,
Mm.
DJing was always the driver in anything else that went on in my career. So it went from like, oh, cool, there's other things I could do with DJing, and I could find like an instrumental of some old 80s record that somehow mixes really well with the percolator, but also with an Outcast, very fast record that otherwise won't fit in my set. And just like thinking about DJing in that respect, which was all new for me, and the fact that Serato had just came out, so I was working digitally, so if I had an idea for a different type of track to combine with another thing or a mashup or whatever, it was as simple as me, you know, either going on LimeWire or like doing
Oh,
it,
yeah.
going to another friend and saying, "Hey, do you have that file?" as opposed to hunting down a vinyl record. So that accelerated the experimentation, and all that experimentation, and also discovering some of the newer um, electro that was coming out of Europe with like, the early Switch stuff and Ed Banger, Sebastian's early productions, meeting Mehdi educating me on a ton of house music. All of that led to the sound of my first couple of remixes, which were suddenly kind of electronic.
Mm.
That came from explorations as a DJ.
And you did the Dirty South dance mix,
Mm-hmm.
which was also
That too.
that was a pretty big turning point for DJs, like having that.
Yeah, and it was a big turning point for me. I'm glad it affected other DJs, but for me, that was the thought process was like, after years of not caring about any kind of electronic music and thinking that all of it was corny, aside from like maybe one Basement Jaxx song and one or two Daft Punk songs that I remember seeing the videos of in Montreal, but for the most part, I'd be like, that's not my thing. Suddenly, I'm discovering, even on blogs and shit, I'm discovering electronic tracks where I'm like, this is cool. This is like grimy. There's like bass lines. The drums are dirty. There's like chopped up vocal samples. Like this speaks to my interests,
Mm.
right? So I'm like, I want to play this, and I want this to become kind of part of my sets. But people know me as a hip hop DJ, so like, how do I connect the dots, and I started grabbing rap acapellas and putting them on electro tracks, and making sort of mashup versions of songs so that it would feel like the A-Trak version of playing a, I don't know, Etienne de Crécy track or a whoever track, a Simian Mobile Disco track. Like if I put some sort of rap vocal on it, suddenly it makes more sense. At least that was the thought process coming from me. And Dirty South Dance became like that, like the manifesto of that, like the mission statement of that. Once I made a few of these little edits, I was like, all right, there's gonna be a mixtape of this, and this will be like, this is where I want to take my sound. And that became the blueprint for even like the early sound of Fool's Gold, and when I met Kid Sister and started producing for her or with her, all that stuff was influenced by my experimentations as a DJ.
Now, speaking of that, Fool's Gold, you signed Kid Cudi's first, put out Day and Night. That's the first record that I ever heard of him, probably the world.
Yeah.
And then the Crookers remix is a great example of that. Like here's a really trippy like hip hop vocal cut, and then now you've got this banging electro remix that just blows up. Like it's comparative to like the Heads Will Roll remix. It's like it's become the song, the version of the song that people know.
I mean, the thing that's really particular about Day and Night is that both the rap version and the Crookers electro version blew up in parallel. Because Heads Will Roll, with all due respect, and I revere the Yeah, but most people don't know the original version, or a lot like people outside of their direct fan base, maybe I should say, casual listeners generally don't know their original version. It's a trip that once in a while there's a song like that where the remix kind of goes even further. With Day and Night, I would still say that the original version is hugely known too.
Influential.
It was incredible to see both versions blow up at the same time in different, obviously on different charts in different territories. That was nuts. And to think that Crookers literally went on the Fool's Gold MySpace page, and the profile song at that time was Day and Night because it was the single we were just about to put out, and they messaged us on MySpace, and we're like, hey, can we remix this? Can you send stems? And it was originally a free download. It was just like a...
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, it was a free download.
Felt like everything was free then.
Yeah, it's true. But I love the how organic that process was. It wasn't like a manager or someone at a label thinking we need a remix. Really, Nick and I were the label. We weren't even sure what we were doing. And just by, the connections of MySpace, Crookers hearing this thing and having an idea, a strong enough idea to literally ask for the parts, right? It's usually the process goes the other way around. It's usually the artist or the label that goes and seeks out a remix. Although, to be fair, Heads Will Roll was similar. I heard It's Blitz, the album, and I remember telling my manager, get me the parts for that song. I have an idea.
Wow.
And my first idea sucked, but the second one was the keeper. Yeah, I heard something in there.
You've definitely heard many remixes of your remix of His Roll.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. Now it's become just like, at least like the section, the highlight reel that you hear in a lot of festival sets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you've collaborated with a lot of people, like, obviously Todd Terry with the DJ's Gotta Dance More, but, you've worked with Falcons, you've worked with all sorts of people in your career, Prom Night and so forth. Is that something that you like as a producer, collaborating with people, or more so than working solely alone?
I don't know if it's something that I like more, but I think collaborating is a process that works well for me, because a lot of times I'm not the guy that's in the studio every day. I spend my days doing God knows what, just like looking after a bunch of projects. And some days I'm in the studio, and some days I'm coming up with a routine, and some days I'm just on the flight. But I'm not the guy that's in the studio every day. So when I walk into a session, whether it's mine or a friend's or whatever, a lot of times I'll have ideas and a certain perspective that'll be different from the person who's there in that room every day. So that collaboration process tends to work, because I usually walk into a room with like a couple references and 2 or 3 ideas, like, hey, why don't we try something like this or something like that, and then we just pick something. And I'm very aware of my own limitations as a producer. Like I've tried to make my producing and my engineering as good as I can get it over the years, and even early on, I was really obsessive with like getting myself on a level that was, good enough to be, competitive, or at least something that you could release and play next to the track of someone whose sole trade is being a producer. I wanted to be able to at least, you know, be comparable to that. Um, but at the end of the day, I'm a DJ first and foremost, and on the producing side, I definitely hit roadblocks, and I definitely there are certain sound design things that either I don't quite know how to do, or I could do if I really spend many days on something, and then someone else can do it in literally 15 minutes.
Mm.
So I end up working with people on tracks because they like those roadblocks get eliminated. I can come with ideas, and if I'm like, all right, I'm hearing a bass line that's sort of like this. Here's a reference. I think I kind of know how to make that sound, but it'll take me 7 hours, and then someone else might just be like, hold on, I have that sound, and we could just follow the ideas. And yeah, there's just certain things that I'm not good at. I hate doing like song structure, like adding the whooshes and the transitions and
Yeah.
all that kind of shit. So I'm happy to get someone else's perspective on that. I think in terms of like the little moments of the song, like, all right, I know this happens somewhere, and that happens somewhere, and that happens somewhere, but like the art of orchestrating the song for it to flow really naturally, again, I can do it, but I'm so slow with it.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
I'll build it out, and I'm like, I'm not sure, let me come back to this tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I like to collaborate, even on some of my own songs that are just under my name. Sometimes if you look at the credits, there'll be a co-producer. DJs That Gotta Dance More was made with Corey Enemy. He really helped me with We All Fall Down also. And there's other stuff that I just do myself. Again, like when I say that I spent 6 months on Heads Will Roll, that's what happens when I try to do something just by myself. I can do it, but I'll drive everyone around me crazy. So after a while, it's like, do you guys really want me to put you all through this? Because I'll get it done, and it might even be good. It might. But I don't know. I'm still, DJing is where I feel most natural, and making songs still feels like a sort of fun exercise to get certain ideas out. I don't think I could ever be the guy that just has 40 beats that are just there available. When someone hits me up, sometimes like artists that I am a huge fan of will be like, yo, send me something, I want to cook up, let's work on something. In the back of my head, I'm like, shit, I gotta come up with an idea. Like, I'm just not sitting on shit like that.
Yeah. It definitely seems like an all-encompassing thing, production. Like, you
Yeah.
just do that every day to get good at it, and sit on beats and stacks
Yeah.
of beats. So speaking of, like, you're busy, you're really busy. You're always traveling, you're working, you've got the Goldie Awards, you've got a record label.
Yeah.
You're making productions and remixes and putting people's albums out.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think doesn't get talked about a lot is just like how people manage their time, how people
Yeah.
manage their life, and someone who's like in your position who's done this for like 20 years, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what are some of the big learnings that you could kind of
Yeah, that's important. And like, it's weird because like, I really don't like saying that I'm busy, but I am, and it's like I can't run away from that. But I have gripes with that word and when it's come to the way it's used in society now, because it's become an answer to like, how are you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and even outside the music world, if any two people catch up, how's things? Things good, busy. It's a way to answer to how are you. I don't like that. It bothers me. And I think for a long time, as I sort of taught myself to do a lot of the things that I now do, there was a sort of learning curve where at first I would sort of go like the complicated route. And, I think as I've grown into a lot of these roles, I've also really tried to like figure out, I don't know, more efficient ways to do certain things. So I try to remove some of the busy, because sometimes being busy is my enemy, because sometimes being busy clouds my brain with like all these tasks that I still have to handle. And I know that the creative part of my brain is just like not really available. Like, there's days where I really need to have the mental space to brainstorm. It could be for the lineup of an event that we're doing. It could be for new ideas for a set. It could be for anything. And it's on some days it feels like a luxury to even have that mental space. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard. It's not something I can do in movement sometimes. I need to be like just in one place for like longer than an hour to just let the stress thoughts kind of like vacate and like let the stillness come in a bit and just think. And that feels like such a luxury sometimes. And so more and more I try to just take out the clutter and be able to do that the most, because that's the part that I think it's important that I do those things more than some of the mechanics. So all this to say in a long-winded way that I don't like the word busy, but as far as how to manage time, I'm not sure if there's like a secret to it, but I will say that um, I've tried to really learn from my own mistakes over time, where there was definitely periods in my life where I pushed myself so hard that it didn't help me,
Mm.
and sometimes I look back at parts, even just the years when I was learning how to produce, that in itself, I really put so much pressure on myself because I felt like the A-Trak name stands at a certain level as a DJ, right? And so if I'm going to put a track out, it has to live up to that. And that's a lot of pressure because I'm supposed to be one of the best DJs in the world. So I can't put a bad song out. I can't.
Right.
So how do you? But I didn't grow up as a producer, so I had to teach myself and like just get good enough that I felt like um, that it was up to par.
It's a great deal of pressure.
Yeah, and I put that pressure on myself, and there'd definitely be days where like if the ideas weren't coming or if there was one of those roadblocks that I was talking about, I wouldn't really let myself like stop or breathe until I got past the roadblock. And through time, I kind of figured out that that's really not the best way, and that obviously
Mm.
like it seems obvious, but like walking away, stepping away, whatever it may be, exercising, taking a walk around the block, something. That's when the idea comes. Inevitably, it's not when I'm this close to my screen.
Yeah.
But I spent a lot of years this close to my screen, you know, uh, uh,
Trying to get through.
just yeah, whipping myself to work through shit. And I really only started going on vacations as I got closer to like the 30s maybe. I'm 36 now, and there's still years. There's literally years that go by where I don't go on an actual vacation, but like just allowing myself to take a break, and like what those words really mean, allowing myself, because everyone around me would even say like, "Hey, you can stop," and I was the stubborn one that would be like, "No, this isn't. I'm not done with this thing, and I'm already late, so I can't stop actually." And so yeah, really just learning that when you get to that very stubborn level of pushing a little too hard, that's not when the solution will come anyways. And I'm still learning as far as like how to balance things out, because a lot of people ask me about like travel and jet lag and things like that.
Mm.
And like the main thing that I've learned with that is you can't not be jet lagged.
Yeah.
Like it's so funny if someone will be like, "Oh, you must be used to it by now."
Nope.
You're never not exhausted.
Yeah.
The only thing that I'm used to maybe, or I hope, is like the only habits I may have gotten a little better at is things that I can do to counteract that fatigue. And actually, I had someone say something to me earlier in the year that's like one of my favorite things that anyone said to me in years. Um, I was at an acupuncturist, and this lady was asking me about what I do and what my life is like, and da da da, and just trying to understand kind of like what to work on, even for herself, what to work on me. And once she got a sense of, the fact that I, you know, am self-employed essentially, and all these other things, and I'll work myself until I fall asleep on most days and that kind of thing. The way that she gave me advice, she said your input has to match your output, and you're
Mm.
giving too much output, and it's not. You're not gonna feel right until you allow yourself more input. And I really, really love that, and I try to say that to as many friends as possible, because we're all in that same field where, like, especially when you're a performer, there's so much of what we do is output. And not even just when we're on stage, when we meet the promoter and the opening DJ and da da da, you're like, you can't close yourself off. But you might be exhausted and just not even want to talk to people. But that's just not the way to be around people who are graciously bringing you to their city. You gotta at least like have your game face on. You're like, hey, nice to meet you. How's it going? Da da da. Like that game face. Not to sound um, spoiled or whatever, but that is tiring.
For
It's an
sure.
effort. It feels like a physical effort sometimes to have the game face on.
I think anyone
Um,
can relate to that,
yeah,
in their
right.
daily life.
Yeah,
You just get tired. Yeah.
even someone that works in retail can relate to that.
Totally.
Anybody can relate to that. So between that, the energy of performing, an output of energy that comes on a sort of fatigue level that comes with traveling, jet lag, getting sick, eating different kinds of food, all that kind of shit. Like all that is it's energy that comes out of you. So I think anybody can think of this input thing. It could be anything. The input could be going to the museum and getting your mind off of things, and thinking, why do I feel nice when I see this painting? I wonder if there's a way that I could do something musically that'll give someone that feeling, and it makes you think of your music differently. Or it's just like family time. Family time is input for sure. Like
For
just like
sure.
I don't have kids, but when I go see my friends' kids, that I feel like it literally fills me up with something. I don't even know what it is, but it's something, right? Or it could be like literally like when I go get a massage, I feel like I'm a car that goes to the shop.
Yep.
Like the body is a machine.
100% relate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And then that's why I've gotten so much into nutrition too, because that too I had someone that helped me with nutrition who was like, his analogy was, you're a high performance Formula One car. The fuel that you put in your car is super important. If you put this fuel versus that fuel, you're not going to perform the same. And when you understand, when you like literally feel on like a cellular level, like on such a microscopic level, how that's true, you start paying attention to what you ingest. That's input, right?
Totally.
And he was like, the guy who told me that, he was like, you need to go to the pit every X amount of laps. You have to. Maybe that's your massage. Maybe that's acupuncture. Maybe it's literally just a bath with salts, whatever. But like, there's a physical thing that you have to give to your body. That's akin to the car going into the pit every X amount of laps.
It's funny you say that too. I've had a conversation with some friends about how DJing. It's. I mean, we have competitions. It's in a lot of ways akin to an athlete or a sport.
100%. I can relate to Olympic athletes. Yeah.
Right. And my friend who happens to train for football, he's like, I get up every morning. The way he had a friend that was coming out to come see me play, and he was like, he's got to go home early. He's got to get up for his practice at 6 a.m. so he can't stay out.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's dope. Like,
Yeah.
that's cool that this guy's recognized that this is a really important priority for his body to function the way he needs, and he's putting, like you said, the inputs matching the output.
Yeah.
And I feel like DJs in a lot of ways are like that, and everything you're saying seems to be.
Yeah, and the same way, if you think of the car analogy, like there's certain cars that for some reason you can still sort of drive them even though they're on empty, and like technically it looks like they should be exploding or dead, but it still runs.
Yeah.
But at one point it really just explodes. And the human body can do that. Like and I'm not even saying that the way I live I definitely am not saying that the way I live is better than the way someone else lives, and I'm not saying that, whatever, partying is good or bad. I'm not even putting a judgment value, but I've definitely observed a lot of human organisms in my life.
For sure.
And I know that there is such a thing as that other sort of modes of operations where it looks like it's all output all the time and it's just partying and not stopping, but there is an equilibrium point that exists there that can sort of run, at least for a certain amount of years. I've never done that myself, and never been like the big party guy, so I don't even know how that works. But like that Keith Richards thing, that like somehow you look at it and you're like, by the laws of physics, this shouldn't be.
Yeah.
There's a thing that can work there.
Yeah.
But I just chose to go another route with it. But I am kind of fascinated with that model. I'm like, I don't understand how that works, but I've seen enough people do it that it can sustain in some sort of way.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of physical things, DJ's got to dance more.
Yeah.
Like dancing and DJing. Yeah. Tell me about that. Like, I feel like there's a really good conversation to be had there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a bad dancer, but the reality is that line is just, that title comes from one line. That's not even the hook. It's something he says in one of the verses, that Todd says in one of the verses. But I love, it's so awesome to get Todd on that record, and I love his perspective because he's aged so gracefully, and he embodies just the spirit of what DJing really should be and should always be and always has been, and we shouldn't forget what those things are. And we can interpret it, right? I think what it probably means is that, you can't get too hyper focused with any of it. There has to be a feeling. If the feeling's not there, then none of it really works. So I think that's kind of, to me, anyways, what that title means. Aside from being a funny line, is this idea that, you know there is a feeling that comes with the music that we all cherish and love, and maybe it just hits your body a certain way. You can't even really explain why it's there some nights, it's not there another night. Um, and also just like having fun, right? Like I think DJing's become this huge industry, and people drive themselves look crazy looking at social media, and there's it's easy to be made to feel like you have to do one thing or another thing because someone else did it that way, or that whole thing. Like, I think the title DJ's Gotta Dance More is kind of hopefully some sort of antidote to that, to say you don't really have to do anything per se. Um, you gotta have fun first, and fun is contagious. You know when the spirit is there, hopefully that draws people to you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, A-Trak.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll have this up soon. So
Cool.
yeah, stay tuned.